Welcome to The Explainer. Let's talk about a situation that honestly sounds like a total dream, but can actually turn into an absolute nightmare for digital agencies. We're talking about landing a massive, complex WordPress project. You get that yes from a major client, and it feels like a massive win, right? But here's the reality check. Based on some incredible insights from the team at Viral Chili, trying to absorb these massive, complex WordPress builds entirely with your internal team is a seriously dangerous game. It's a game that creates exponential risk for your agency. Because look, internal teams are usually built for standard load pressure. When you try to stretch them across a massive project, it disrupts literally every other project in your portfolio. So today, we're going to break down exactly why this happens, and more importantly, how you survive it. Let's dive in. So a really common trap agency leaders fall into is thinking that a large project is, just a bigger, small project. It's definitely not. As we shift from standard to large scale, risk totally stops being linear. In a standard project, if something goes wrong, the consequences are usually manageable. They're localized. But large project risk, that is exponential. The sheer volume of moving parts, the drawn-out timeline, the intense visibility within a client's organization, it all acts like a giant magnifying glass. Your standard capability gaps don't just cause minor delays anymore. They snowball into complete delivery failures. And minor scope uncertainty, that suddenly spirals into a massive scope crisis. The stakes here are just incredibly high. There's a quote from our source material that hits the nail on the head. Large website projects create the most significant difference between a project that goes well and one that becomes an agency-defining difficulty. I want you to really think about that for a second. When does a massive opportunity shift into an agency-defining crisis? Well, it almost always happens when internal generalists, the folks who are normally fantastic at juggling multiple standard projects, are suddenly stretched way too thin across a highly specialized, large-scale engagement. To help you avoid that exact crisis, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, we'll unpack the large project risk. Second, we'll look at 7 complex project types. Third, client and agency dynamics. And finally, vetting partners, showing you exactly how a specialized white label partner like Viral Chili becomes a huge strategic advantage for your margins. Okay, let's jump right into section 1, the large project risk, and look at how risk fundamentally changes when you scale up. The absolute crucial point here is that large projects amplify every single risk that already exists in smaller engagements. You cannot just muscle through a massive build. It doesn't work. Your internal team is sized for normal, everyday pressure. They simply can't reliably provide the deep specialist knowledge and the dedicated, uninterrupted time needed for large-scale work without completely trashing the quality of work across the rest of your agency's portfolio. A timeline slip on a massive project affects a client at a scale that a small project delay never even touches. The cost of getting it wrong is just exponentially higher. And there's actually a critical tipping point to watch out for in your project timelines. While there's no magic one-size-fits-all rule, a project extending beyond 3 months is basically a flashing red light. This 3-month mark is what we call the white label threshold. If a project is projected to take 3, 4, or maybe 6 months of dedicated work, your internal teams are absolutely going to be overwhelmed. Once you hit this threshold, bringing in white label development support isn't just a nice to have, it's highly advisable if you want to keep your agency running smoothly. All right, moving on to section 2, 7 complex project types. Let's identify the specific high-stakes environments where white label specialists will consistently outperform an internal-only team. The experts at Viral Chili identify 7 specific types of large projects that fit this bill. We've got enterprise rebuilds, multi-site deployments, e-commerce migrations, membership platforms, headless WordPress, multi-language sites, and high-traffic publishing. Let's actually group some of these together narratively so we can see exactly why they demand specialized white label intervention instead of just tossing them to your internal generalists. Let's start by looking at enterprise rebuilds and large-scale e-commerce migrations. When generalists tackle these, they tend to rely on really optimistic estimates, and they figure things out iteratively as they go, which, let's be honest, in agency terms, is kind of just a polite way of saying guessing. And that's a recipe for disaster. White label specialists, on the other hand, rely on heavy upfront diagnostic work and systematic execution. For an enterprise rebuild, specialists audit the existing platform to accurately define the scope, rather than just guessing. Or for e-commerce, like moving a massive store to WooCommerce, specialists use procedural knowledge to preserve product data, keep order history intact, and make sure SEO continuity across URL structures is locked down before the migration ever even goes live. Now the risk multiplies even further when we talk about multi-site deployments and multi-language sites. The architectural demands here are just incredibly severe. We're talking about multi-site networks with 10, 20, or more sites that require complex network-level configuration and shared resource management. Or think about multi-language setups with 5 or more regions, needing precise HIF line configuration and totally distinct regional privacy compliance for every single jurisdiction. Specialists build this infrastructure correctly from day one. Generalists, well, they tend to discover these complex requirements iteratively as they add regions, which, guess what, usually leads to having to tear down and rebuild the entire architecture halfway through the project. Not fun. Then we have headless WordPress. A headless implementation combines a WordPress backend with a modern front-end framework. So why is this such a huge risk for internal teams? Because headless projects represent the widest possible gap between the complexity of the requirements and standard agency experience. You need simultaneous, deep expertise in WordPress API configuration, front-end architecture, complex caching strategies, and totally unique deployment workflows. It has to perform correctly in reality, not just on paper. Finally, let's group complex membership platforms and high-traffic publishing together. Here we are talking about tens of thousands of users, complex custom gating logic, or maybe a news site getting slammed with a massive breaking news traffic spike. Specialized load management, object caching, database query optimization, and tricky payment integrations are mandatory here. You literally cannot afford to discover failure modes in these systems after thousands of paying members or concurrent visitors have already hit the site. Specialists build for real catalog and membership volumes from the very start. Okay, so we know the technical risks. Now let's hit section 3, client and agency dynamics. How do you actually manage the client and the finances when you're using a white label team for these massive projects? This brings us to probably the most crucial financial question every agency owner faces when taking on a massive, unpredictable project. Can white label development actually reduce your financial risk, especially if you've gone ahead and made a fixed price commitment to your client? The answer is a massive, resounding yes. When you use your internal team on a complex project that they just aren't specialized in, your internal costs are totally variable. They expand unpredictably as technical complexity balloons, and endless, painful revision cycles eat up all your billable hours. But by bringing in specialized execution, you convert that unpredictable internal resource drain into a predictable external cost. You can account for that safely right inside your fixed price margins. Plus, because the specialists know exactly what they're doing from day one, you dramatically reduce those costly scope discoveries and revision cycles that absolutely destroy agency profitability. Now, you might be wondering, but what about communication? The rules here are actually incredibly clear and structured. The agency, that's you own the client relationship and all the strategic context. You maintain every single piece of client-facing communication. The white label developers never ever communicate directly with client stakeholders without your involvement. The external partner works strictly behind the scenes. This is exactly how top-tier partners like Viral Chili operate. It allows you to present the highly specialized technical execution as your agency's own unified delivery. So, now that we understand the value, we've arrived at our final section, vetting white label partners. Let's talk about how to properly select and brief the right technical partner so everything goes off without a hitch. A large project requires a significantly more rigorous upfront briefing process than your standard engagement. You can't just hand over a napkin sketch and say, hey, build this. A thorough scoping process has to include deep integration dependency mapping, a full hosting environment assessment, highly detailed content migration planning, and strict performance target definitions. The investment in this upfront documentation is directly proportional to the scale of the project. If you provide an inadequate brief here, the cost to your agency is going to be dramatically higher than on a standard project. When you're vetting a partner to hand this brief over to, this is the golden rule right here. Demand demonstrated experience with specific large project types, not just general capability claims. It is simply not enough for a partner to say, oh yeah, we're great at WordPress. You want a partner like Viral Chili, someone who can describe specific, comparable large-scale challenges they have faced. Ask them about a massive WooCommerce migration or a 20-site multi-language rollout they've done, and make them tell you exactly how they resolved those technical hurdles. Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. I really want to leave you with this question to chew on. Are you structuring your internal team for a massive opportunity or an agency-defining crisis? The next time you land an absolute whale of a project, rethink your resourcing strategy. Consider whether your agency is truly protected against the exponential risks of large projects, or if it's finally time to leverage the specialized depth of a white label partner to turn that massive risk into a massive win. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer, and as always, keep learning.